Today for our main lesson book, we're going to write out the recipe for thunder cake. So we're just going to go to the next page, and we're basically still doing math, so I'm not going to do a new title page right now. Okay, so I'm going to start by making my border, and I'll use my mama bear here. And I might need a little extra room on one of my pages because recipes can get kind of long. So I know this might be a lot of writing today, but I think we're gonna wanna have these recipes completely written out. So we're gonna try it. I'm gonna make my top just a little stormy looking. I'm giving it a few little bumps up there just to make it a little bit stormy. Okay, now let's see, I keep my thing right there. All right. So we'll start with this page and then we'll add the next page. And I think we're gonna get through the whole thing today because over here we're not writing, we're just writing ingredients down. So I think we'll be okay. All right, I'm gonna use this kind of the bluer, the greener kind of blue here to write thunder cake at the top. Thunder cake. Okay, now I want to use my pencil so that I can get in as much writing as possible. Okay, so I'm going to show you some abbreviations that we use when we write recipes. So the first ingredient is 1 cup of shortening, or you might use butter in this recipe. I used butter when I made it because I don't usually have shortening on hand, but if you use shortening, you could use that. So 1 cup. Now we can write out cup, or we can just write 1 with a capital C by it, and that means cup. I'm just going to write out cup, this recipe. And then shortening, shortening, I-N-G, or butter. And then we have 1 3/4 cup sugar. Now these are called fractions. This is a part of a cup. So 1 whole cup is just 1. But you'll notice on some measuring cups that there's little lines, and you might see this 3/4. 3 with a kind of a slash and then 4. That means if you were to divide that cup into 4 parts, you're going to use 3 out of those 4 parts. So the bottom number tells us how many parts it's been divided into, and the top number tells us how many of those parts we're using. So we're going to fill it up 3/4 of the way. After we do 1 whole cup, pour that in, then another 3/4 of a cup and pour that in. Next we have 1 teaspoon. Teaspoon is a long word to write out. But if we want to abbreviate it, which most recipes do, we do a lowercase t, s, p, and then a little period. That means we've abbreviated. 1 teaspoon vanilla. And that's vanilla extract. Then we have 3 eggs. And we want to write here separated. Separated. When we make this recipe, we're going to put in the yolks first, mix that all in, and then the whites we're going to put into another bowl and beat them with an electric mixer until they get to be kind of stiff, peaky, and then we fold those in. So that's just gently stirring it in. When we say fold it in, we'll get to that when we write out the instructions over here. 3 eggs separated, 1 cup cold water, 1/3 cup So in this case, we didn't separate the cup into 4, we separated into 3. And we're only gonna do one of those 3 parts of pureed tomatoes. And so that means like tomato mush. I used a can of crushed tomatoes when I made this, and it was just perfect. You could also take a fresh tomato and smash it up into like a nice pureed mixture, or you could throw it in the blender or something like that to make it nice and smushed without any chunks. And then we have 2 1/2. So again, here we've only divided the cup into 2, and we're gonna fill it up 1 part of the 2 parts. 1 1/2 cups flour. Now, if you're not quite understanding what I'm talking about yet, that's okay with these parts of the cups. That's okay. This is something we're really going to learn about in 4th grade, but we can start kind of getting an idea about it as we start baking. And now we have 1/2 cup dry cocoa. Now, this is not like the kind of cocoa that you would drink. This is baking cocoa that doesn't have any sugar in it. So it shouldn't be the, don't open up some Swiss Miss and put it in. That's too sweet. You want just the dry cocoa powder that is no sugar in it, because we have plenty of sugar up here. All right, and then we have 1 1/2 teaspoons, baking soda. And 1 teaspoon salt. So that's all of our ingredients. Now we're gonna come over here and write out our instructions. So I'm gonna prepare my page again. Use the same blue that I used over there. And make this kind of stormy across the top again. And I'm a little worried that I'm gonna run out of space here, so I might make this, you see what I'm doing here? I'm kind of pushing this up just a little bit so that instead of being right along the edge, I'm gonna give myself a little less room at the top so that maybe I can squeeze in an extra line. Just come down here and draw across the bottom there. So I don't know if that gave me more lines or not. I don't think it did. So we'll just try to make it work. Okay, so we might have to write pretty small. What they usually tell you to do, very first thing, is to preheat the oven so that the oven will be warm enough when you're ready to pop your cakes into it, that you don't have to wait for it to warm up. So first we're going to preheat the oven. Now over here, you notice I didn't use a lot of capital letters when I wrote down what the ingredients were. Over here, I'm going to use capital letters to tell us when I'm starting a new sentence in our instructions. So we're going to start with preheat, and that's all one word, oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, period. Grease, that's a kind of, there's a lot of vowels in that word, isn't there? G-R-E-A-S-E. Let me just zoom in a little bit here so you can see. Grease and flour. So that means they want you to take the pans, the cake pans you're going to use, and put grease all over the bottom. I like to use butter or coconut oil or some kind of maybe even vegetable oil would work. And they just want you to smear grease all over that. And then you pour a little flour into that and shake it around and then dump the rest of the flour out. And that'll make it so your cake won't stick. So we're going to grease and flour 2. And I'm going to leave a big space here so it doesn't look like I'm saying 28 because it's 2, or I could even do a little dash. 8 1/2, and these are close together so we know they're part of the same number. Inch. Round. You could use square if you wanted to, but we want a round cake. You gotta use a round pan. Round cake pans. Okay, so now we've got everything ready so that when we get to these end parts, they're all ready to go. Now we'll start mixing up the ingredients. Cream together one at a time. I'm going to use a little punctuation here that's called a colon, 2 dots like that. That shows I'm about to write a list. Now, before I write my list, I'm going to tell you what this means. Cream together. That means that we're going to put together the first few ingredients here, this shortening or butter with the sugar. So you want to put those 2 ingredients in the bowl and really mix them together so that they're really creamy and kind of really smooth consistency. So you want to get them nice and smooth before you add anything else. And then you can start adding your vanilla and your egg yolk. So we'll get to that spot. So we'll write cream together one at a time. Shortening, shorten ing. Sugar. And if you use butter, you just butter here instead of shortening. Sugar, vanilla, and egg yolks. Now watch how I write this. Y-O-L-K-S, yolks. That's the yellow part of the egg. So somebody, if you're making this, you're gonna want somebody to help show you how to separate the egg yolk from the white. What works really well is you can crack the egg, and I think Miss Scala showed you how to do this in her video on making tempera paints, but you crack the egg and you kind of put it into your hand, and then you let the whites dribble out of your fingers into a different bowl, and then the yolk should be left as long as it doesn't break, and then you plop it into your bowl with the vanilla, sugar, and shortening. You can also, there's also a little tool that you can buy that you can put over a bowl, and it has like a tiny little cup inside and a little ring around that. So you crack your egg into it, and the yolk sits in the little bowl and the white dribbles through. Some people also would crack the egg and they'll just pass the yolk between the 2 eggshells while the white dribbles out. But you want to make sure you have a different bowl for your egg white to dribble into so it doesn't get into the shortening and vanilla, because in a second we're going to beat that egg white. So I'll put a period here. We're done with that sentence. So now we're going to beat the egg whites. Beat egg whites. Now, when we write a recipe instructions, we don't always use words like the. We kind of can shorten it down because otherwise we're going to be writing forever. So I might not be writing sentences that seem totally complete when writing cooking instructions. And that's okay because we kind of want to make sure we have enough space for everything. So we can, instead of saying beat the egg whites, we can just say beat egg whites. Whoops. And I don't want to have an S there actually. Beat egg whites. Until stiff. So the egg whites will get really fluffy and white. as you beat them with like an electric mixer, or you could use a hand beater and just beat them for a really, really long time. And it'll be to the point where if you stuck your mixer in there and pulled up, a little mountain would form. So that's how you know that it's stiff. I'll put a comma, then fold in. So that means that we're going to take those stiff egg whites, pour it into the mixture we've already made, and then we're gonna fold it in. So we're just gonna sort of scoop from under and keep, it'll feel like you're folding what's in there, but it's not really foldable because it's not solid enough, but you're just sort of folding it over like that. So that's kind of what it sounds like, but it can be a little confusing if you've never heard of that. And then we will add water and tomatoes. Oh my gosh, have you ever heard of a cake with tomatoes in it? I was a little skeptical of this, but I tried it and it tasted really good. But the weird thing is when you put those tomatoes into this mixture, your eggs, your butter or your shortening, it might make little globs all over. It look kind of weird, but just stick with it because it'll all turn out fine in the end. All right, now we're going to, in a separate bowl, we're gonna mix our dry ingredients over here, the flour, cocoa, soda. We're gonna do that in a separate bowl so that we don't get like a big clump of baking soda in a bite. That wouldn't taste very good. We wanna mix all the dry ingredients together so that when we mix those in, they're all dispersed evenly. So we'll say in a separate bowl, combine flour, cocoa, baking soda, and salt. Mix with wet ingredients. Whew, that's a long word. All right, I've got one more line to talk about baking. All right, let's see if I can get it in here. Pour into cake pans. Bake. Oh, how long do I bake this for? Let me check. "35 to 40 minutes. I'm just gonna abbreviate minutes, M-I-N. Whew. And we're gonna keep the temperature at 350. So we got it all written in there. I hope you were able to. That was a lot to write. And if you ran out of space, it's okay to go on to the next page. Now this also says to frost it with frosting, but it doesn't give us a frosting recipe. So I'm going to include a frosting recipe that I used when I made this, or you can look up a frosting for a buttercream frosting if you would rather use that. And I really encourage you to make this cake at home if you want to. And of course, make any kind of substitutions you need to over here. If you don't eat a lot of sugar, you can cut way back on the sugar if you want to, or you can add you can use some kind of sugar substitute. You can also use gluten-free flour here, and you can use whatever kind of thing you usually use in baking instead of butter or shortening, whatever you want to do there. So however you want to adjust it for your family, that's great. But I hope you have a good time making this cake, or make a different cake if you don't want to make this one. But it's really fun to bake a cake, so I really encourage you to do that this week.